What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Behind the Door. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We've had some hard-hitting episodes lately with some really amazing guests, and today we're gonna unpack Jeremy's story a little bit more. So I think we're like 7 episodes in on the podcast now, and we've heard a lot about the need for criminal legal reform, a lot about recovery, but I don't think we've heard really enough about Jeremy Hilt's story and the inspiration that is what this man has made of his life. And so we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit today. And, Jeremy, what I'm wondering, and I think what some of the listeners are wondering is, how do you go from being in and out of the system, starting off as a young person, going in and out of a really harmful and traumatic system, dealing with your issues of substance use and addiction. And, how do you go from there to now operating one of, if not the biggest recovery organizations in the state of Maine that's a huge service to our community? And just as a side note, I can't even tell the listeners how many people I've interacted with personally who have talked about the importance of the recovery connections in Maine in their life. And they've talked a lot about you as an individual and you as a person who really believes in the work that you're doing and shows up for people. So, just kind of start us off, man. How did you go from getting out of prison to establishing Recovery Connections of Maine? What was that journey like when you finally realized this is something that I want to dedicate myself to doing?
Oh my God, that's a lot to talk about. But RCOM has been Recovery Connections of Maine has been so important in my life, not only for the people that we serve, but being like an employer, like being responsible to make sure that people get food on the table and stuff. It's a huge responsibility, it's a huge weight, but it's one that I wouldn't trade for the world, just because of all the positive things I've been able to witness people do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it's interesting because I didn't necessarily ever wake up one day and say, I want to start this treatment center. That it was, everything just kind of has played out, you know what I mean? And it's played out in a way that has made sense, you know what I mean? Like the way the program has played out, it's been a progressive thing over several years, But, you asked, how did I get there to that? And it was I feel like I'm not actually sure some days, though, honestly, because I wake up some days and I'm like, how did this even happen to me? How did I get into this position? You know what I mean? Because, when I visit the prison these days, I still see people that I really care about that are behind the walls. You know what I mean? And that drives me on a lot of days. You know what I mean? Like when I don't want to get up out of bed, when I don't want to show up, when I don't want to do all that, I think about the people that are locked up that don't actually have that opportunity to have the chances that I have in my life. So I think gratitude is like one of the biggest things for me that's helped me from day one until today, is that like I'm super grateful for everything that I've had. I don't necessarily know if I deserve it some days, you know what I mean? Like I don't know, and I think that's just me being a human being,
Yeah.
Because, it's interesting. I'll just tell you this story because this is like the real deal. How things were how RCOM played out, and it goes way back to because I'm not I'm not necessarily a religious guy, but I'm certainly a spiritual guy, right? Like I've been listening to messages for a really long time, right? And one of the most important messages that I received happened when I went to I was using drugs, you know what I mean? And I was using drugs and I was buying them from this guy that I had done a lot of time with, and he was like, I thought like well respected in the prison community, right? Like it was one of those scenarios where it was like, and at that time I was like ride or die, you know what I mean? I'm gonna ride out with this, you know what I mean? Whoever I was around, like I was an outlaw, you know what I mean? Like in my mind, it was just I was actually pretty sick, really. But this guy, he got caught he got caught trafficking heroin, right? And I was like involved with it, right? And he ended up going to the prison first, and he was telling he started selling heroin with a correctional officer, right? And I was in Wyndham. I was at the main correctional center, and I was waiting to go to the prison. For whatever reason, he got arrested, and he was at the main state prison about 2 or 3 days later, and then like immediately started selling heroin, right? So he went to the prison first, and he was telling people that I like told on him, and which I hadn't, but he was selling heroin, so he was paying people heroin. He put a hit out on my head for heroin for somebody to poke me when I got there. You know what I mean? And but I'm down in the main correctional center, and I'm waiting. I'm on AdSeg. I got maxed out. I got maximum security, so I got to go to CPOD. You know what I mean? And this is funny because it's like, checking into, they call it checking in, right? Yeah. To protective custody. I can't do that. You know what I mean? So I'm like going up there, and I really wasn't necessarily worried about like, at the time, like what was going to happen to me. I didn't know if I was going to end up spending the rest of my life in prison, because I was going to do everything in my power not to get stabbed in prison. You know what I mean? Like that was just where I was resigned to, you know what I mean? And I was listening to the Big Jab on the headset. And the next thing you know, I hear a news flash come over that he had got caught with the correctional officer selling heroin in the prison. And then but I'll just back up one day, because I was like thinking about all my options, like, and that was like what I had come down to, is like I might have to spend the rest of my life in prison. Yeah. But I kind of prayed in that moment, like something's got to change. You know what I mean? Like something's really got to change right now. Like I don't know what this is going to be like, because at that moment, everything, the prison mentality and all that stuff, when I was going through that, when like I knew that somebody was going to try to stab me for heroin, the whole mentality, everything that I had known, like about like, staying solid and doing this and living life that way, I looked around and I said, everything's fake. You know what I mean? Yeah. Everything is not real here. You know what I mean? Like this loyalty that I have for these people, it's not the same. You know what I mean? And from that moment on, I started to like look for signs, because it was like, I felt like somebody was talking to me for a moment. You know what I mean? Like somebody finally heard me in a really weird way, right? Because it just gave me because then I started seeing life again. You're like, I'm not going to have to do this. I am going to have a future. I'm going to be able to come out of this. You know what I mean? And so I had, went up to the prison, and I made it to the prison farm. And when I was at the prison farm, then I started, my roommate is bringing in drugs to my room. You know what I mean? So I start doing cocaine and benzos at Boulder, right? And then again, I'm in the bathroom of the Boulder Correctional Facility. I'm looking at myself in the mirrors. In the mirror, I had probably been using cocaine for 3-4 days, Brandon. Like it's like 2:00 in the morning, and I'm looking at myself going, I'm getting out soon, man. I got a year left. I'm going back out here. I'm gonna die out here. Yeah. Something's got to change, right? And then probably 2 or 3 days later, this white van comes to pick me up, saying, they said, pack your stuff. You're going to this recovery, to the residential treatment program, the CRA. And that program completely changed my life, because I was introduced to people that cared about me. They cared enough about me to tell me the truth about myself. And so I was like ripe for the picking almost, because I had already, a few years before that, I had already started seeing the people that I was incarcerated. I had already started to break down that prison mentality. So that program kind of finished the job in a lot of ways. And it allowed me to open up and see the trauma that I had been through, what incarceration had done to me, how I handled people, how I communicated with other people, because anger was my first thing, you know what I mean? That was my go-to, you know what I mean? Like, and I was always in that fight or flight reaction, and so that program really shaped like what was going to happen to me next, you know what I mean? Because when I went there, it was like, you know, everybody in the prison system call it like the rat program, stuff like that, right? But it was more about like, but I had already like started saying, I don't care about that nonsense anymore. Anyways, you know what I mean? Like it was already there. I said, everybody, half these people that are saying this did it anyways. You know what I mean? So why do I care about that? So I had started going into that from that perspective. And then I really started to learn about the brain. I started to learn about a lot of different things. And it really piqued my interest, you know. And so I went through the program, and I had gotten out. I went down to the Friendship House, South Portland, and I was doing that with my friends too, like Bill Walbridge, who works with us now. He went through the CRA program. He went to the Friendship House, and now he's out here working in our recovery houses, you know. And so when I had you know, at that point, I get out of the, you know, I did about, you know, 6-8 months down the Friendship House, and I really got a feel for like the 12-step community, and I got, you know, to make a lot of solid connections with the recovery community itself. Like I really started to see it. And so one of the things that I really learned in the CRA program was like how to connect with other men and a brotherhood, you know what I'm saying? And I sought it out because I needed it so much, you know what I'm saying? Like I had to have it. So I really tried to find those connections, you know? And so it goes along a little bit. And I was working at this call center, right? I'm working at a call center. I'm actually doing pretty well. They promoted me as a supervisor and stuff. And then I was actually selling products, penis enlargement products over the phone. It was
hilarious. Hilarious twist to the story, people.
You know, I think I'm slick too, so I'm like saying all kinds of sales pitches that were out of control. But it was like I look bad, but it was like I was making good money, and I wasn't up on a roof. I wasn't lugging shingles and stuff like that. And I started to like actually, you know, do something. And then I showed up to work one day, and the place was closed.
Yeah.
There was the lock was on the door. First time I had ever been successful at solid employment probably in my life. And
there had been too much enlargement in society.
too much.
There was no more room.
Sold out. Yeah. Everybody's good now. But they so what I was panicked because I was young in my relationship with my wife. And I think she was pregnant at the time. You know what I mean? I'm like, what am I gonna do next? And the only thing I could do is they always told me just reach back out, and I called the program and I said, what do I do next? And this woman, her name was Supervisor Jody. She was like, you know, had a really good impact on my life, and she said, go to school and become a counselor. Go down to this place called Intercoast Colleges and go down there and become a counselor. I said, okay, because I was just programmed to do what they told me. You know what I mean? And so I did that, and I went through school, and I didn't necessarily know if I was going to make it through the school. You know what I mean? But honestly, like me being me in survival mode, like the thing that got me is I was going to get like $7,000 for the semester. They were going to give me a check to live off of $7,000. Yeah. I was like, okay, at least I have $7,000 coming in if I sign up for this school. Because school for me was not, I wasn't successful in high school and all that stuff. And you know, I hated school. I hated the social aspect of school. And so I didn't know if I was going to make it. But I said, I'm just going to take this thing one day at a time. I showed up the first day and I made it through the first day. And then I made it through the first week. I turned in my first paper. And you know what I mean? I started to see myself as being a little smarter than I thought I was. You know what I mean? Like, I was street smarts and that type of thing is one thing, but like, how do you do papers and stuff? Yeah. I had no idea at that point, you know, but I made it through, you know what I mean? And then I got the degree, you know what I'm saying? And then it was pretty interesting too, because, you know, I had to make an amends later on, but like, you know, because of my criminal history, I took to school, and the first thing I asked them is like, if I go to school, am I going to be able to become a licensed counselor? You know what I mean? At the end of the school, I had to go to a hearing after I had passed the test. You know, it was a certified alcohol and drug counselor test. So I passed the test, and and now I got to go to this board, and I had so much anxiety. I think I went and I told the teacher, You better, I better pass this. I better get this thing, man. You told me, man. I just gave you my life for a little bit. You know what I mean? Because at the time, my wife had just had a baby, right? And I was driving. I was going to school. I had to be in South Portland at 8 a.m. And we went to 1 o'clock, I think, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I worked a second shift job from 4 to midnight at a different call center.
Yeah.
So I leave my house in North Turner it takes a little over an hour to get there. So probably about 6:30, 6:45, I'm on the road. And I go to school all day. I come back in town. And I go right to my call center job. And that's 4 to 11 or whatever, 4 to midnight. You know what I mean? It was like 8 hours.
Yeah.
And, then I'd drive home and I wouldn't get home till after midnight. You know what I mean? I did that for over a year. You know what I mean? Like that type of a schedule. I didn't see my kids. You know what I mean? Like it was just a very grueling time. And and then I was also painting. Like I would get side jobs painting houses on the weekends. You know what I mean? So I knew I had to grind it out. You know what I mean? And to be honest, I look back at that part of my life and it was simple, right? There was one goal: get the fucking job done. You know what I mean? Like I can't turn back. I can't go back there. You know what I mean? Like we're running. You know what I'm saying? Away from that. You know what I mean? And part of it, like that drive, I through therapy since then is like, running from the trauma. You know what I'm saying? I run as fast as I can, and like I ran in a positive direction this time, but it hasn't, like, to be honest, it really hasn't always been the healthiest. You know what I mean? It's overweight. You know what I'm saying? Like I just everything was about the work at that time, but so I, as I'm getting older, I'm really trying to find more balance in my life. You know what I mean? But the biggest thing that happened during that time was like I set a foundation that I could really do anything I want. You know?
Yeah.
Because once I finished school, after I went into it like that, I was like, "There's no fucking way I'm gonna fit." That's what my thought process was in the beginning, and then you actually get it, and then you're like, "Wow, man, I actually did this." You know what I'm saying? I actually made it through, and then I went to the hearing, and they gave me the license. You know what I'm saying? And so I started working, and at the time, when I started working there, at that moment, it was like the way I started working at a program that did an intensive outpatient program. So people would come in 3 hours a day. They would come to treatment, group setting. They would see a doctor, and they were prescribing Suboxone and stuff at the time. It was very controversial, and especially in Lewiston, the community that we were in. And it was very controversial for me too, because I came from this hardcore abstinence kind of a program, and then like the transition mentally, like I had to like figure out, like, it doesn't matter what type of medication somebody's on or whatever, like that's not my place. You know what I'm saying? Because when I went into it, I was like, I'm going to try to get everybody off this medication. That was my goal.
Yeah.
And then I started seeing people get better, right? Like I started seeing people get
with
kids back with the medication. Yeah. So I was seeing the evidence and the visibility of the progress in front of me. And so it like changed my mindset, And then as I'm getting farther and farther into the field, like I started to see how agencies like I was working at was using that medication as like a carrot. Like, oh, you didn't show up, so you don't get your medication. We're going to split the prescription. Do all this crazy stuff, and people are out here just trying to, you know what I mean, like real life issues going on,
trying to survive,
right? Like, and I did not agree with like how treatment was done at that moment, and so like I'm working with, and then I start seeing a lot of people that I had done time with. They start coming into the treatment center that I'm working at, you know what I mean, and then I start recognizing the differences in that, you know what I mean? Because there is like, with this cultural competency that we have to be super aware of, is like, we know this person's issues are different, you know what I mean? They have different set of, their thinking's different, the way they operate is different. It needs a different sort of treatment for that, So as I'm working in the program, these programs, I worked at several in the Lewiston area. I also worked down in Biddeford, Portland, Sanford. I worked all over the state of Maine, and for whatever it's worth, I started to believe that I think I can do this better.
Yeah.
I think that when somebody is vulnerable enough to come to you for help with a substance use disorder, they're open for everything else. You know what I mean? If they need, and it's not just about the treatment of the substance use, it's about the treatment of the life around us, right? Like, so if I don't know how to fill out a job application online, how am I going to be expected to, like, this is 2023, right? You got to be able to you got to be able to use an email, right?
Yeah.
And why is it that we're in treatment, but we're not trying to help people make an email that's never done that before? Because that's how you're going to get your needs met, like dealing with probation, dealing with DHHS, dealing with all these other things that you got going on, and it's hard to communicate, right?
Yeah, that's interesting to bring up as a point, like, of how oversimplified sometimes the recovery process can be, that if we just get you off of drugs, that you'll succeed.
Well, what I know is it was much more than that for me.
Yeah.
But I knew that, like, I didn't know how to go to school the first day I went to school.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No one ever prepped me for that. We never had those real life conversations about, because I talk about a lot. When I was in prison, I'd be like daydreaming about how things were going to go in life, and then you get out and it's like, bam, like everything's different than what you just thought of you for the last 4 or 5 years, So I started to think, like, so we do a lot with the Career Center, the Lewiston Career Center. They come in, they've been working with me for quite years, over a decade. Yeah. And now they just developed a program for our residential program that they come in, they develop a 6-month program. And at the end of that 6 months, they bring the employers into the actual residential treatment program so they can get connected. But they prepped them for months before the actual thing. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think like 9 men are guaranteed employment when they get to the next one. You know what I mean? Like those are the things that really, so it's not just about, like, okay, so the trauma and all that stuff is there, but, we've heard it on this podcast several times. I know it to be true, but, like, we start healing and we start feeling better about ourselves when we're working on tangible skills that are going to make our life better. You know what I mean? Like, I'm taking care of things. I'm like, I'm organized, right? I have this, I have that. Those things are just as much part of the package as dealing with the trauma, right? Like, you gotta wrap somebody up in it, like art. You know what I mean? Like, art has been big. Like, we want to make sure that people have ways to express themselves. Sometimes it's art. I've seen people didn't have any idea, just like me on the first day of school. I don't know how to do art. You know what I mean? 6 months later, they're artists. You know what I mean?
Yeah, full-fledged.
And that becomes the empowering. Just like learning that art just becomes empowering because no one ever really cared to teach me, A, and B, like, I can do something that I didn't think I could do. You know what I mean? Yeah. So when we're in that, it's, and that has really been the essence of, like, what we're trying to do is build community, right?
Yeah.
Recovery Connect. We and so as we've been developing the thing, not everybody's going to come out of prison or come off the streets or do whatever and come into treatment with us and buy into the community concept, or can buy into the community model. And it's funny because over time we see a lot of people coming back into treatment for whatever reason, and you start seeing them buy in little at a time. And then the third or fourth time, they're right in the middle of things. You know what I mean?
It's almost as if you introduce it to them, and at first it feels so foreign to them that they kind of reject it. And then when they're back out and things aren't going well, they start to think, like, maybe there was something there. And then maybe the second time, it's like, okay, I got a little further. And then the third or the fourth time, or however many times it takes, people start to realize that it is that connection, it is that community that is, like, the thing that rounds out recovery.
Yeah.
Right. And I love hearing you talk about the idea that recovery from substance use disorder is only a step towards the right direction of, like, getting things together. Right. I don't think this is something that we talk about enough. And I think it's really important. And in your story and the story of how Recovery Connections of Maine started and evolved into what it is now, is that you were working programs after living programs, after, like, every phase of the lived experience that you have, where you finally realize, like, man, I'm watching people come in, and when the only focus is like recovery from drugs and alcohol, it's still not enough to get people where they need to be like a happy, functioning person in society.
Well, to me, that takes you're removing a solution to a problem.
Yeah.
Right. But you got to replace that solution with another solution, right? And in order to do that, a person really kind of needs to be empowered in some way, right? And so when people can connect to resources and develop tools that they never had before, because they've just been introduced to it, you know what I mean? It's not because it's like they're not capable of it, or they've just never had a conversation about, like, you know, I think really cool. Andrew Scoggin Bank is putting together a workshop for us too that I'm really interested. I can't wait for our clients to be exposed to it, because they're going to be talking about you know, credit scores and starting businesses,
financial well-being,
just financial well-being, for just that overall financial literacy, you know. And you know, and some of the best things that, like I said, I've been working with the Lewiston Career Center for about 10 years now, and they every time I've ever asked them for something, we've held joint job fairs in Kennedy Park.
Yeah,
you know, the Lewiston Career Center in Arca. Some of the proudest moments I've ever had in my professional career has been in conjunction with the Career Center, because I fortunately have the opportunity lots of times to see somebody get connected to a job and see where they're at when that happened, and then see them 6 months down the road when they're working some meaningful employment,
and thriving,
and doing well with that, you know. And then there's the other side of it too, where folks get good jobs, and then they start making decent money, and then we don't really necessarily know how to manage that all that well, right? Because that can become you know, spending money can become feeling driven.
Yeah, for sure.
So you know, then that's another place that we can step in and go, hey, how can we help you with, you know, I mean, your finances are falling down. That's a big deal. Like, let's work on getting you on track with that. Let's have an open conversation. But when you introduce that to somebody as an idea, that, like, I can help you with your budgeting money and this and that, then it becomes an easier conversation when it's not working out so well. You know what I mean? Because we've introduced it, you know.
Yeah.
And it's really we've had, you know, for the, like I said, not everybody buys into it. Not everybody, like, it translates for everybody. But for lots of times, the seed's planted, sort of like you were talking about. And once the seed gets planted, like, it's easier to go back, right, to the garden after you planted the seed.
Yeah, and just keep watering it a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting. Just, I want to recap for everybody. So, you know, you talking about your experience coming up in the system as a young person, getting in trouble, you know, discovering substances as a way to kind of mask the trauma that you had endured in your life, and then continuing that cycle of coming in and out of jail and prison and masking that next layer of trauma with continued substance use. And I really love the part about your story where you're talking about how, you know, you don't really have an explanation for why you got to the point that you got to, where something had to change, right? It's really hard, I think, for a lot of times for people to pinpoint what that exact moment was, but you were able to kind of point out some instances, some stories, some signs that you experienced where they just pointed you in the right direction, like, man, I don't want this life anymore. And then it's amazing to me to hear you tell that story and know hundreds of other people who have told a similar story where something pointed out to them that, like, this is not what I want anymore for whatever reason. And I think one thing that, you know, society needs to do, that we need to do, that your program is really focusing on, is getting people to that point where they're capable of recognizing, like, no, I really don't want to do this anymore. And there's people here to support me on getting on a better pathway. But I love the story that you've told so far, where it's, you know, I had those moments, I had those signs, I paid attention to those signs. I had some major conflict in my life where I'm rationalizing potentially doing something to spend the rest of my life in prison just to save my life. And then a series of events unfolded that kind of continued to awaken you into the fact that there was something else out here for you. And you go to school, you get your CADC, and you get involved in a recovery community that had the very thing that you had been missing for so many years, right? Which was this idea of community and connection. and then like the penis enlargement stuff doesn't necessarily work out for you. In selling it, for the record, I just want to point that out there. Selling it didn't necessarily work out for you, and you called a support system that had been very pivotal in your life to ask for advice. And that's a part that I just don't want anybody to skip over, right? A lot of times as people who are facing like insurmountable odds with their recovery and their reentry, the thing that's the scariest thing in the world is to reach out and ask for advice or ask for help. And I just want to point that that's a really pivotal part of your story, is that you did that, and that opened the door for you to work towards your CADC and then work for some organizations where you realize like, man, I'm doing good work, but this could be done better. And so at what point, you know, in this whole story, did you realize not only could this be done better, but I think I could do this better?
And I think for me, it was like, you know, in the program that we were in, I was the director of that program was super influential in my life.
Yeah.
His name was Jim Sims. Old director Jim. He was about 5'4", and he looked just like Colonel Sanders,
Yeah.
a bucket of chicken. And when he recently passed away a couple of years ago now, and me and 5 other guys went to his service.
Yeah.
And we found out like how he lived his life before he passed and before we knew him, like this other side of it, right?
Yeah.
Because he was a very stern man, but like he was very loving too, you know what I mean? And he would say, I'm going to hold the mirror up for you, you know what I mean? I'm going to show you, because that's the only way it's going to change. And we found out that like this guy, you know, he tamed wild horses, you know what I mean? And he was like the best in the area at it. And I really started thinking about it in a lot of ways, like, you know, this is like almost the same process that I feel like I went through with him. He like broke me down a little in the ways and like connected with my soul. And so what he taught me was like how to be an actual leader, right?
Yeah.
Like how to like, you know, understand that like not everybody's going to agree with your decisions, right? Not everybody's going to get behind what you're doing, but you got to keep going anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No matter what. Because who are they to say if you're right or wrong? You know what I mean? Or like the dreams that we have, you know, he would talk about it. He said, Jeremy, if you just keep going, man, just stay with it. And I always go back to that. You know what I'm saying? Like I go back to there because I've come a long way since then. You know what I mean? I've come a long way since the days I was sitting in his office, and you know what I mean? He's having these conversations with me that like I never had before with anybody else. You know what I mean? He's saying things to me that I never knew before about myself, right? And then that's what like kind of he got me to believe that I could be a leader. You know what I mean? And so when you know how this applies to the question you just asked me is that like, you know, I was watching it and I was watching these as I felt like people were being mistreated in a lot of ways in the situations that I was in. And it's like, you know, if you know that somebody's being mistreated and you don't do anything, are you complicit in the mistreatment of these people? Do I just come in here and get a paycheck and like not like what's going on, and then look at myself in the mirror and go, yeah, this is the way it should be? Like I can't do that because of what was instilled in me at that time. You know, what I mean? Like I had to do the right thing, no matter who's looking, no matter what's going on, and that principle has really served me well in a lot of ways. It was like, you know, that, and like, you know, when I went out on my own, because it was a process, I had tried to start an agency 3 different times before RCOM even started. I went in on it with, you know, I had a couple partners that deal that sort of fell through, and then I had a couple, and then I tried to do it on my own, and that didn't work. And what I didn't know at that time was like I wasn't done learning yet. I was putting the cart before the horse, and I hadn't learned. So really strategically what I did is I got a few people that I know, and we all started working at the same treatment center with the intention that we were going to start our own program. And we were learning on the job. I said, we got to come up in here and work for about a year or 2, and then we're going to go do something else.
Absolutely.
And so we had all these people like learning, and like that was on their radar. And then like I had to, like everything's were going on internally where I just had to make a move. I couldn't wait. So I left one agency, and then I went into private practice. And, a lot of the people, I had built a good reputation with some clients in the community, and they started coming to see me. I was doing individual work with them and those types of things. And it was in a 1 room, 2 rooms on at the professional building on Lisbon Street. And, I didn't have teammates there. I was like pretty much up there, you know what I mean? I was just seeing clients come in and out of the room, but I started having groups, and I started to try to make a community for the people that were leaving from there and coming over to see me. One of the doctors that's my medical director now, Dr. Richard Entel, was very instrumental in that, like, 'cause his approach to medicine and addiction medicine in particular has been groundbreaking for me to see how he handles things. And so he was interested. He came on early on, and he really helped me make the transition. So then when I was in private practice, after I acquired the knowledge that I had learned up until that point, I gave it another shot. And now I'm out on my own. I'm in private practice. So I went through the licensing process, and then we got into a decent building, and we were able to start hiring people. And we've added some recovery houses. We have about 3 recovery houses, and then we went through a process where in our recovery houses we recognized that there were some men that were coming into those recovery houses that weren't. They needed more help. You know what I mean? And there was a lot of the guys with long-term solitary confinement. And so we made it a 6-month, 20-bed residential treatment program, right, for men.
Yeah.
So that when somebody's struggling up here, we have an option that we can get them into treatment and get them 24/7 care. You know what I mean? So it's really just building and like trying to continue to do the right thing, right, in the spirit of what I've known. You know what I mean? In the spirit of connection, and the spirit of really just trying to do what's right. And I've honestly, like, I've had disagreements with other organizations, and I banged heads a little bit in the field, and I'm okay with it, because at the end of the day, every time I put my head on my pillow at night, and I know that it was because I was trying to do the right thing. You know what I mean? In the moment, and those are the principles that I have to live by right now. Like, we got to do the right thing no matter what's going on.
Yeah.
And everything's going to be okay. You know what I mean? You got to follow. I've followed the signs to this point,
I mean, it's such an important story to tell. I'm like just really happy that we get the chance to do an episode that really focuses on, your trajectory from the things that you've been through and the things that you've endured into, operating this program and this business that like genuinely helps people in our community and makes our community a better place. And the one thing that I think we've left out so far that I'm interested, because I know that it'll be important for people to hear, and because I'm interested in it selfishly, is you go from the, all of the experiences that you've talked about, and then branching off into private practice and doing one-on-one, counseling sessions with people to help them on get their footing and their trajectory towards recovery and like really sustainable living and sustainable happiness. And you make this transition into the organization now. And the part that I'm wondering, man, that I think people will really need to hear about is how did you come up with the name, right? Because there's a lot of recovery programs in our state. There's a lot of recovery programs in our country now that we recognize the real damaging effect, especially that the opiate epidemic has had on our society. But when I think about the name of ARCOM, right, when you hear ARCOM, if you don't know what it stands for, it's just ARCOM. ARCOM is a name that people recognize. They know what ARCOM is. And then you hear the name, and it's the Recovery Connections of Maine. And how did you come up with that name? What place does Connections have, not just in the title, but in the work that you do? Because I hear you talking about how important it is, but I'm interested from the perspective of naming the organization that you have, that you've built. It seems like that seems to be a really important part of the process for you, this idea of community and connection.
Well, so connection was always something that we wanted in the name, right? And my wife and a couple friends, we were kicking it around a little bit, and connections was like the biggest thing. Like, connections had to be there because it's really it's the goal, right?
Yeah.
It's to connect. And then, obviously it's like recovery. We're treating addiction. So we recovery. And then I started really thinking about that recovery is not just about like substances. Recovery is like, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of different things that people are recovering from that we need, you know what I mean? At least something. Like we started a family program, right? Like a family support group that anybody, whether you're a client, not client, whatever, you can go in there every other week. And, if you have a loved one struggling, it's really confusing for people. We can get, you know what I mean? It's a place to check in, talk to a master's level clinician about what's going on and kind of get some education. You know, that's just like one example, you know what I mean? Of, you know, people are recovering from a lot of different things. Yeah. So it was like recovery connections, and then I'm not really sure how the main got in there, but
I mean, it makes sense though. You know, it makes sense because of the local context that you serve, and I just think I just want to like really come back to how important it is for people who are listening and watching, and people who will ever encounter this episode specifically and your story, that, you know, for you to say that connections was always the piece that you knew and that the people that you went into this with knew would need to be there, is because you recognize through your lived experience and through what you've witnessed in your life that, you know, recovery is not enough, right? Recovery from substance use disorder, recovery from addiction, recovery from all the different things that we call it, is not enough to give people a sustainable living and a future and happiness and meaning in their life. And that those things really come from the connections piece, right? And I love hearing you talk about this idea that, you know, we can get people off of drugs, and how long will it last if they don't have employable skills? How long will it last if they get anxiety and having conversations with people? How long will it last if, you know, not just their basic needs are being met, but also those higher levels of needs of belonging and community aren't being met? And so, you know, what I hope everybody is taking away from this is just that idea of, you know, if you can't connect to people, and if you can't connect people who have been through these experiences and lived through this trauma, if you can't connect them, then you really can't recover either, right? If people aren't making connections in the community, if people aren't making and reconnecting with their family and their loved ones, and if people aren't connecting to the resources that you've talked about have been so important in your story, right? These influential people who gave you a way to believe in yourself, who gave you a way to reframe, you know, where you've been versus where you want to go. Without that connection, then what are we really creating that's sustainable? And that's, you know, as your friend, man, and as somebody doing this podcast with you and really watching the difference you're making in your community, which is our community, because this is my community as well. It's the connection piece that has been the most powerful part of your story personally. And it's also the foundation of the work that you do, and everybody who I've ever heard from that's been like, man, Arcom saved my life. And when I ask them why, the connection is what they talk about, and the recovery is almost secondary, right? The recovery was the first step.
Well, let me just say this, man. Like, and I'll just, and so I don't want to say like something that's. I just want to be clear about this, right? Like that, the recovery and all this stuff. It's all like. It's all. We're all just human beings trying to get through the world. You know what I'm saying? And so, like the recovery and the labels and the way we look at, you know what I mean? It's like, we got to connect to each other. Yeah, really. You know what I mean? We call it recovery connections because, you know, we treat, you know, substance use disorder, but in a lot of ways, you know, the solution to it is love, man. You know what I'm saying? Like we people just need love sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, that happens when they come to the door and somebody's there to shake their hand and say, hey, how you doing today? You know what I mean? You okay? And like creating a positive, intentionally creating a positive atmosphere for people.
Man, it's such a powerful part. It's so needed that you said that, right? And I just flash back to like 4 of the episodes that we've done so far and the guests that we've had on here. And, you know, not everybody's story is the same. Not everybody's story is a story of recovery from substance uses, but one universal truth that I've found in dealing with people who are in recovery or with people who are in prison or reentry is that what you just said is an unequivocal truth, right? People narrate that the transformative moment where I really decided to turn things around, and this is true for me in my personal story, is I met somebody who treated me like a human being when I didn't know that I deserved to be treated like a human being, because all of the things and stories that people were telling about me made me feel less than that. I mean, that's such a huge thing to think about, the idea of the recovery connections remain centered on this like absolute truth that you have to treat people like humans with love. And as corny as it sounds and as mushy as it sounds, like if you don't treat people with love, if you don't treat people with dignity, and if you don't just recognize their humanity, especially in the moments where they're struggling the most, then you can't ever ask them to recover from whatever it is that they're facing. And so I just want to say how much I appreciate you as a friend, man, as a brother, as somebody I consider family, and also as the person you are in this community who's doing this work. And just want to remind you that I know that the program that you're running is working the way that you just described it, because I've had people tell me that it was that exact thing that like gave them life in your program. And it was the second chances and third chances that you gave people, recognizing their humanity and their need for belonging and community, that finally got them to a point where they were at.
Yeah, I don't believe in the chances, right? Like we all got one chance. We got a heartbeat. That's the only chance we got. You know what I mean? Like, and if we, I do really what it comes down to, and especially in this day and age, this is a life or death situation people are in, right? You got one chance to live. That's it. You know what I'm saying? Like everything else is a bad day. You know what I'm saying? Or whatever happened. You know what I'm saying? That's why, just keep coming back. Just keep coming back, because, I didn't have these, like there wasn't treatment centers like there are now when I was getting trying to, you know what I mean? So it's we don't want to leave anybody behind out there. You know what I mean? We want a place for everybody to be, because people, like human beings, deserve that. You know what I mean? Whether they're coming out of prison or not, everybody's been through something, man. Whether you've been locked up, how many people, you know what I mean? Like, they're struggling in other ways. You know what I mean? Like there's just, this struggle is real for everybody. You know what I mean? So it's like that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with human beings that have a different type of struggle than maybe the next person, but like the emotions and like the way we think and process things, they're all the same. It's all the same stuff.
I love this idea almost as like a slogan of sorts that you just brought up. It's just like ringing in my mind right now. Is if I was to tell people something, I would say, if their heart's beating, that means they deserve another chance. Because like you said, the heartbeat is the chance. We have one chance to live, and as long as we're breathing and as long as our heart is beating, you still have a chance, and you still have hope to turn it around. That's a really beautiful way to look at it.
That's why we just don't look at like this is a second, third chance.
No.
You can't try to, you know what I mean? It's like not, and it's really, for us, for me personally, like recovery isn't about time, right? It's not about how long you haven't used a substance or whatever that looks like, right? It's just like, are you healthy right now? And if not, like, how can I help you?
Today, not
today, right? Like, let's just keep moving. Like, we're just trying to make it through. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. Thank you for being bold enough and brave enough to share your story with us on this episode. I know that's a tough thing to do, but I know it's going to inspire a lot of people who are listening.
And I just want to say this too, is that like without my family and my kids, I don't know if any of this would be possible, because, I'm kind of a wild dude, and without them to ground me, without those relationships to ground me and being there for I'm about to be a grandfather next month. You know what I mean? And that's, you know what I mean? It's like, that grounds me. It gives me hope continues to give me hope for my future. And like watching my kids come up, my son, he's back in college, and my other boy, he's he played soccer, and my daughter just got her own apartment. She's having a baby, and the relationship with my wife, she's always been there for me, you know what I mean, no matter what. And I know that I'm deserving of that, right? But do I know if I don't have a home to build, do I have the stability? You know what I mean? Like that's really, really what made a big difference in my life,
Yeah, and if people didn't give you the chances, and if people didn't treat you with the dignity and show you all those things, then you might not have ever had the chance to really realize everything that you just 100%. Talked about. And I think that's something that I want to leave everybody with today who's listening is, if you're sitting here wondering how you can get involved, if you're sitting here wondering how you can play a positive role in your community and help people recover and help people connect, the first step that I'd ask everybody who's listening to do is like, really listen to what Jeremy's saying, and really listen to what so many of our guests have said. Maybe start with just treating somebody with love and dignity, regardless of what they've done and what they've been through in their life. When you encounter them, and, just tell them that you hear them and that you see them, but then actually go through the process of hearing them and seeing them. And that's just a beautiful message to leave people with, man. treat people who most of society stigmatizes with the love and the dignity that they deserve, because they are breathing, which means they have the potential to turn it around. And who knows, do amazing things like build a community of recovery residences and a community of people in recovery, and really contribute positively to the world, because people who struggle are capable of doing really beautiful things, man. If you're not a perfect example of that, I don't know what is, man. So thank you for sharing that story with us today. And thank you for everybody for listening and riding with us with Behind the Door.
Yeah.
We got more content, more episodes coming. We're bringing the door nationwide. We're going to be driving it all around, and we got more really interesting guests coming, and more positive, powerful stories for you to listen to. So thanks a lot, Jeremy, man, for riding on this journey with me.
Appreciate it.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, man. This has been Behind